Hi, everybody. Welcome to TNM Coaching Unplugged. I'm so grateful and happy that you're here with us once again. Thank you so much for expanding and growing our community. We're always grateful for your likes, for your shares. I know that a lot of people are benefiting from listening to us. And today's conversation, it's something that I was really looking forward to because we're going to explore leadership from the place that we not talk about that often. This is about integrity, humanity, what really truly matters when we lead with intention. And I know that in corporate world, those words are not used that often at this moment in time. My guest today is Dawn Stallwood. She is a corporate commercial lawyer with decades of experience on boards, owners, leadership teams throughout growth, deals, crisis. And she also brings very unique perspective to what is needed for the leadership today. She's an author of new, beautiful, powerful book that I love, which is Beautiful Leadership, your personal framework for authentic impact, which is actually challenging traditional viewpoints of how leadership is perceived, and that we don't see leadership as a power any longer, but we reframe leadership to service, integrity, and the conscious impact. One of the things that I would love to highlight from the book, like why being a beautiful leader really matters nowadays. Beautiful leaders, from Don's perspective, have purpose to collaborate. They inspire. They remove obstacles. They're here to serve others. They listen deeply. They are empowering. They lead with empathy. They embrace improvement. And they have courage. And I think to be a beautiful leader nowadays, you really need to have courage as well. So we're going to dive into this beautiful leadership framework. We need to be brave. And we need, by Dawn's perspective, the army of beautiful leaders in today's world. I'm sure that Dawn will agree with that. Dawn, welcome to the call to this podcast. I'm very grateful and happy to have you today.
Thank you, Zoran, and thank you for that introduction. And yes, for such a time of this, we definitely need to be brave, and we absolutely need an army of beautiful leaders who hold very tightly and protect all of the qualities and disciplines that the framework speaks of. It's there's not a single day when I don't listen to the news where I say, yes, for such a time as this, are we being our most beautiful selves in how we operate as a leader? Because it's so important.
Yeah, I know. And I know that you have a beautiful career behind you as well, an interesting career. So what inspired you, to come to write this book? Give us a little bit of your journey into the book.
Sure. So 51. So I decided in my 50th year that it would be the year I would have a legacy moment. So I don't have children. And it was like, okay, so how do I leave something behind that might be useful for somebody else? I think 50 is quite an interesting moment in your life. So
Hmm.
I decided that that would be the year that I would do something that was legacy related, and that turned out to be the book. How the book came about, I'm involved in a Christian-based faith and ethics leadership um, charity. I'm a trustee of it. It's called Faith in Business, and every
Hmm.
year for 30 odd years they've had a retreat at Cambridge University, and it's a opportunity to rest, retreat, and think around a particular theme. And 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the theme was beauty in business. Could business be beautiful? And what did that look like? And I was asked to do a keynote on beautiful leaders
Hmm.
because most of my work over the years has interacted into leadership teams, CEO offices, or management teams. That's the nature of mergers and acquisitions, business as usual, crisis, etc. You need to speak to a decision maker, and that can be a decision maker in a UK PLC or Fortune 500 company or a small fast growth businesses, family generational.
Hmm.
Fundamentally, you've got to become an expert in relating to leaders, and so that's sort of become sort of my thing, I suppose. So I was asked to speak on leadership, and what made the book become Beautiful Leadership itself was actually out of a moment of crisis for me, because I was going through the menopause, still am, but I was definitely going through the menopause and the brain fog that comes with it for many women in my late 40s. And so I was asked to do this keynote, but I was asked to do the keynote without any notes, no presentation, not a single slide, no visual aids. And I remember just staying up the whole night before in an absolute panic, feeling a total failure, you
Can
know,
I do this?
massive imposter syndrome. It's like, how I can't remember where my keys are. I look in the fridge, how am I going to do this? And I'm going to let everybody down, and they're trusting me, and all the spinning that we do when we get worried
Yeah,
about things, false evidence appearing real. That's in the
yeah.
book under B for Brave. Anyway, I sat there with the word beautiful written vertically. I thought, well, maybe I can maybe I can find a way of prompting myself through using a mnemonic. And
Hmm.
that was the beginning of Beautiful Leadership. So Beautiful became the mnemonic device and my savior on the day of my talk, telling of the 9 qualities that I thought leadership should be based on. But that would have been a short book. And actually, leadership, the discipline of leadership, is something that we sometimes forget. We can focus too much on the qualities and the attributes. But what gives us momentum and scaffolding to be sustainable in our impact? And that's not just sustainable, Zoran, in terms of how our leadership is received by others, but it's also how we as individuals, from a well-being point of view, can sustain ourselves in leadership, because it's a very difficult job. So the practices or the disciplines of leadership are equally important to the attributes. So leadership became 10 more chapters, and then the framework was born. So yes, so I wrote the book, because I feel that I've been gifted with lots of insights and moments with leaders where I've seen them at their most raw and vulnerable across all types of pressure points, decision making, confusion, disappointment, fear, anger. And so having that privilege has enabled me to formulate something that I hope serves them as a cheerleader and a sponsor, but also can help those coming forward into leadership or growing into leadership. I call them apprentice leaders
Hmm.
of whatever stage or age, to be very intentional about it. So it's a gift in a way from me to the leaders I've served and to the ones that I won't meet. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, it was probably the hardest professional work I've ever done in my life, because you cannot write a book like this
Mhm.
and not own it yourself personally. So there's a line in the book that said, "When I wrote this book, I thought I was writing it for you. Now I
Mhm.
finished, I realized I wrote it for me."
Yeah, exactly. Isn't that amazing? I love that authenticity that you share this with, because it is like when you write the book, you write it for yourself, People
Absolutely.
say build the house, write the book, have family, all these foundational elements of one's life. This is all for you in a way, but it's also give to the world. So when you talk about the framework, tell us a little bit more about, the framework. How does it look? How does it feel? What is the framework of a beautiful leader?
Sure. So the way so I mentioned the fact that there are 2 mnemonic devices. So basically they're acronyms, and each letter is one of the chapters and one of the attributes or qualities or practices. And there's a natural flow between each one, and there's a natural connection between the practices on the one hand and the qualities on the other. So if I give you a bit of a spoiler alert, um, in qualities, beautiful, B is for brave, E is for empathy, A is for authenticity, U is for unpretentious and unifying, T is for transparency. If you think about, there's a natural flow between all of those, right? So if you're brave, if you're courageous, you will have greater capacity to be more empathetic because there's nothing to fear. If you are more empathetic, you will automatically be more authentic. And I
Mhm.
think leadership today, that is the big call, isn't it? Is my leadership authentic? Am I being true and real to the people who are relying on me and in whom they place their trust? So, and if you are being authentic, you can't be pretentious. You can't
Mhm.
be lofty. You will be humble. You
Mhm.
will be unpretentious, and you will naturally have this cheerleader sponsorship, this uplifting attitude. And then if you do all of those things, people will naturally see you be transparent, and you will feel confident to become
Mhm.
transparent. So there's a natural flow, which I hadn't realized actually until I was doing the knitting between each of the chapters towards the very end of the editing process. And I realized that actually another gift, and the gift was a natural flow. And then if you look at leadership, I'll give you the first 4. So L is listen to learn, not listen to speak, but listen to essentially listen to understand. So listen to learn. E is execute to earn respect. I think that's
Mhm.
fundamentally important. Do what you say you're going to do. A is for adapt, and D is to practice difficulty. You have to,
Mhm.
it will come, so you may as well practice for it. There's an analogy in the book where I talk about simulator training. One of my former clients was a Concorde test pilot and trainer, and he would spend hours and hours and hours in the simulator, and rightly so. I'd want him to practice and hone all of his ability to respond with agility and to manage difficulty on the ground. But
Mhm.
he'd done the prep work, and I think in leadership, there's no space. there's often no space for the leader to do anything other than to just react. And the practice of slowing down and practicing the difficult, or helping your team members to practice those scenarios, eases your strain, empowers them, qualifies them. And again, if you look at LEAD, listen to learn, means that you will naturally be able to execute better because you'll have an understanding. If you're executing to earn respect, part of that will mean you'll have to be agile and adapt as you go along from time to time. And difficulty is something that you don't shy away from. You don't have a culture that encourages your team, even subconsciously, to hide mistakes or problems or difficulties or challenge, rather than better to embrace it as a team and bring your best brains and practical thinking into the scenario. So that's just a little bit of a snippet. And at the very end of the chapter, at the very end of the book, I talk a little bit about one of the influences, or the influences of writing the book. So there are two influences. I call them the faithful, so the clients, the leaders that I've served and their teams, and then my faith. So my faith as a Christian, I came back to faith in 2012. So spirituality has become quite a big part of my life in how I try every day, sometimes fail, of course, try every day to show up. But there's a piece around the Christian faith and the ethics and the values that come from those teachings, that tradition, if you like, that absolutely leans towards leaders needing to be beautiful and needing to be practiced. So there's a standalone chapter, and purposely standalone because I didn't want anyone to disqualify themselves from reading the book. So it's there because I'm being transparent, because I have to be.
You're honest in your, exactly, transparent and honest.
So it's right up there at front that says, hello, these are my two influences. You can read the entire framework without needing to read this other chapter. It's a completely optional chapter. Read it if you want, skip it if you wish. And that's gone down very well. It took a lot of debate.
Should you include it, right, or not?
Should I include it? Should I weave it into every chapter or not? And it was actually, no, I'm going to, the vast majority of the clients I've served over the years do not share the same faith base that I have. And we've got on just fine. We've found common ground. And they know where I stand, and I know where they stand. So I wouldn't want to disqualify them, because the book is built on the blessing that they've given us, essentially, through the experiences I've had with them. So it was a brave moment. There are many brave moments in the book.
You need to show up as an author. It's such a vulnerable space when you share yourself authentically. You show up with courage and bravery, then it becomes really authentic. And I also love that you've done that, because for me, the diversity and inclusion nowadays is really, really important. And for us to really be able to work well together in diversified working environments, we need to understand the point of view of the person who is we're relating to. So sometimes it's really refreshing to understand where do you come from when it comes to your faith or belief or standing point, in order for people to relate well with you. So I know that people sometimes are curious about the author, and I'm just going to divert into that a little bit, and we'll come back into leadership. So when it comes to that Christian faith, so what is this pillar that really helped you become the person that you are today? Somebody who is courageous enough, brave enough to write the book like this, to call it like that. Because for me, it's also the title. Sometimes there's so many business books and they have fancy titles: become more efficient, become more agile, become leading in the age of AI. There's all this buzzword. And when it comes to kind of really being real, what is necessary and needed nowadays in a very plain and simple language that we can all relate to and understand, especially if you break it down to this in the way you did, it's refreshing. So what I'm curious about is that core of you. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So I came back to my Christian faith in 2012, and it hit me like a juggernaut when I did, in that a lot of how I perceive business should be, and transactions and negotiations should flow in a particular way, I was often disappointed, and I could never understand why it really used to sort of affect me personally at a deep emotional level when leaders didn't operate in the way that I had anticipated. I put them probably on a bit of a pillar. I think we all run the risk of doing that, whether people do it to us, because we all fail and are flawed. or whether we do it towards other people. And so my journey back into faith was really powerful, because it just helped me realize, well, this is why it's so important to me. And at its heart, and this probably sounds really corny, but I have a very strong maternal instinct towards my clients. I have been known to threaten clients to sit on naughty steps and put them in cupboards if they don't behave in transaction negotiations. Some deals, even though an exiting founder, for example, wants to leave and wants to do the deal, they have a habit of unpinning a hand grenade and still throwing it into the deal room. And so you have to be able to deal with the humanity in those moments. So for me, I genuinely care very, very deeply about my clients, because I see them at their most vulnerable and at their most challenged. And I just want to help, and I want to protect them. And the Christian faith is all about, loving thy neighbor as thyself. And within that, it's really about showing up for the leader. So that's probably the genesis of why my faith has become an anchor for me in terms of how I operate. There are plenty of books that speak about, servant leadership. But I think at its heart, that's what my spirituality, my choice, my tradition, if you like, that's what it calls me to. It calls me to service. And so I will intentionally use the word serve. And not that I supported a client or I facilitated, but when I served that client, and it's not about status or rank or me sort of being submissive. It's about me just saying, what am I actually here to do? I'm a professional service provider. Therefore, I'm here to serve. And I best remember that that's what I'm here to do. And the likes of Simon Sinek, his book, Leaders Eat Last, it's John Maxwell, they've all spoken about the power of servant leadership. And I think the challenge with servant-hearted leaders, regardless of whether they have it through a spiritual tradition or not, is that they also need, alongside that, incredibly strong boundaries. And what I found it spiritually in the Bible is that there's plenty of boundaries being set in the New Testament and in the stories that Jesus shared during his ministry, which talks about boundaries, And I think sometimes it's like yin and yang. You've got to have one, and you can't have one without the other.
Exactly.
And so for me, the coming alongside clients is that I serve, and sometimes I'm their boundary as well. Yeah, so that's just a little bit of a sense.
Beautiful.
A sense of
Thank
me.
you so much for that, because I think it's important. Usually people ask, who is the person, behind, and people are super curious. And this is why we're on the podcast, just to kind of get a little glimpse in your spiritual landscape. So moving back to leadership, you mentioned a few times that you served a lot of leaders in their most vulnerable times. And when we reflect on the times today, like there is the emergence of the AI technology, geopolitics are really challenging for everybody. Where do you see that leaders that you serve, need most support?
I think it's around expectation management. So, leaders are responsible to someone. They're stakeholders in every direction. So it's about expectation management, and that sometimes makes you very unpopular, and it definitely requires you to be brave. So in a VUCA world that we're living in now, it's very important that leaders have the courage to be able to say to their non-execs and chairs and out into their wider stakeholder base, whether that's employees, suppliers, clients, that's not possible, or I can't achieve this without that. Or if you want me to go and do this M&A strategy and do some buy and build, then I'm going to fall over if I don't have resource. So there's a definite piece around expectation management and bravery. I think it's really important. And I think the other thing that I think is very important now, you touched on AI, and we might go into that in a bit more detail, but being able to to have the time to critically discern where AI fits into the organization, and separating the notion of efficiency from resilience. And what I mean by that is, there are lots of things I could do in my businesses where I could use AI. And yes, it would make me more efficient. And yes, it would make things more effective. But I'm not sure it would actually make me better as an individual in the role that I have, and in how my role is then received and valued by the clients that I look after. So the importance around resilience is around human-centered leadership. So it goes back to the qualities and the practices. If you strip out leadership activity, management activities, apprentice leaders coming through, if you strip out the hard knocks, the stuff that builds resilience, the moments of challenge, the moments where we have to really sort of think outside the box and do the independent thinking ourselves, if you strip all of that out, are you left with something less than you have in the equivalent leaders now? I was with a client yesterday evening, and she said something really interesting. She's a very, very regular commentator on world geopolitics and economics. And she was talking about using AI to read scans, medical scans. And that on the first pass, it's now generally considered that the AI review of scans, is almost as good as, if not better, if not the same as an individual looking at it. But then a senior person, and this is the point, a senior experienced radiographer will then review the scans and will be the person that notices something unusual or an anomaly. Now that person's able to do that because they've had 30 years, 20 years of looking at scans manually. If all of a sudden somebody coming into a profession no longer has the opportunity to do that review and to do that deep work, in 30 years' time, when they're the person needing to check the scans to make sure there's no gotchas, are they going to have it? And if they don't have that ability, but they're still trying, that's a very stressful place to be. So leadership is about managing in a VUCA world, setting expectations, and I definitely think creating the space to be really discerning around how we use AI for the generations coming through. Because I fear a vacuum.
Yeah, me too.
I really do.
Me too. And I think that the word discernment, I love that. I use it a lot when I coach and guide other leaders myself. I discerning, really having this critical thinking and creating the space and time. You also mentioned that for that to happen, because sometimes in the VUCA world, because we go through the priorities and day goes really quickly, a lot of the people report they don't have enough time and not enough time. So there's no time to be still, to really discern, to think about things properly, and to think this through to be able to make the decision in the best possible way. And you also mentioned in your book emotional intelligence and being able to connect to your feelings and using other qualities of our humanity in addition to logical thinking to be able to feel the decision instead of just thinking the decision, right? It's so important.
Absolutely. It's incredibly important. And you touch on something really, if I think about the 10 leadership practices, I think the two that are actually the most difficult for leaders is S is for space and setting boundaries, and H, which is for hold. And it's, hold is split into three. It's split into hold on, which is custodian. What am I responsible for? Hold off. So the art of waiting well, and hold out, when to exercise restraint. Space and setting boundaries, I see, despite AI and other processes in organizations, I don't see leaders being less busy or less operationally involved. I see them busier than ever.
Exactly.
And it's I've got a client I've worked a lot with over the years, incredibly hardworking leadership team. One of them is away on vacation. Email came in, I'll be offline for 48 hours. It's like as if they felt that they had to actually say, by the way, I'm offline for 48 hours, I'll be back online again. And I really feel for that individual, because it's just through huge conscientiousness and commitment and probably a lack of capacity that they feel that they need to, is it okay for me to take a couple of days out on my holiday? Well, number one, you're on holiday. And number two, yes, of course it is. I'm a fine one to talk here, Zoran. This is preaching. This is a self-preach moment, because I have been horrendous at managing boundaries around sort of downtime and holidays and vacations.
Yeah, but many people are nowadays. Many people are, and I think that's why we're talking about it. That just to refresh their mind, and setting the boundaries, making sure that you have time to reset, to refresh, not justifying, not excusing yourself. This notion of leader needing to be online all the time, no matter what.
Yeah.
It's draining on a certain level, and then our performance drops down. And as you said, efficiency versus real Mhm.
And there are two other consequences to it as well. One is that you don't actually empower those around you to actually grow into their own potential.
Mhm.
If you're constantly being the person who can answer something because it's off top, it's there, it's off the top of my head, I can answer it. And I was guilty of that when I was a partner in a law firm, where I can save them time because I can do it. I know that. That's at the tip of my fingertips. Even though it's not necessarily the best thing to do to empower your
Mhm.
team, because you're almost disempowering them.
Mhm.
Even though you're doing it for all the right care, loving reasons, efficiency reasons, it's still not necessarily the right thing to do. And the second thing is around governance. So, you know, leaders, even in critical moments and moments of pace, leaders still need to make the best decision that they can, armed with all the information that they should have access to.
Mhm.
So, part of the boundaries management is also in helping teams to enable their leaders to be the great decision makers and custodians of the vision that they need to be. And you can
Mhm.
only do that if you equip them. So you, as a follower, let's say, are also responsible to lead up into your leader by making sure that they're furnished with the right information, that you preempt the questions that they're likely to ask, that you give them the time and space to be able to consider it. You present the information in the way that's most appropriate for them as a communication path, and you
Mhm.
don't go around them.
Mhm.
And I see a lot of frustration, even in very large organizations, around governance and governance gates. And
Mhm.
they are there as a boundary. Um, I They're there as a boundary, but I think actually if you rebadge those not as a governance gate, but actually as a space gate, as a gate to enable somebody to make the best informed decision in the round, then you see it differently. And if you see it with empathy, then you also should try to help your leader more. You've got no idea what's on their books on any given day, what's on their
Exactly.
desk.
Yeah.
Um, and yes, the thing that you've got that's burning in your hand, yes, it's the most important thing that you've got. And you absolutely need to get your leader to weigh in and make a decision. But they may have 15 other decisions already backed up and two more that are just about to come in that I have no horizon for at the moment.
Mhm.
And it's empathy towards a leader from the followers is very important. You know, it's like when you're interviewing, if an individual for a role, sometimes it feels like you're the one being interviewed rather than you interviewing the person for the role. And so there
Mhm.
has to be a balance of, I have responsibilities as a follower towards the leader to help them be the best leader that they can be. And there's a lot of a book speaks about that quite a bit. And then the leader has the responsibility to equip the follower to be the best follower that they can be, and also to step into their full potential,
I love that.
whether
And I love
whether
that you
whether the leader likes it or not, because it's not
exactly.
always comfortable.
It's not always comfortable. And I love that you opened that one in your book, stepping into the full potential, really growing, developing, enabling. And I love the whole dual responsibility, because I
Mm.
think that speaks volumes when it comes to us having leaders and us, how we show up in the space of leadership. One of the other things that I really wanted to dive into quickly with you is that you strike me as somebody who was able to be authentic. You mentioned that, in your jobs, they perceived you as motherly type. You were able to call people to be more responsible for themselves with decision making and so on and so forth. And I know that in the corporate world, a lot of the leaders are struggling to give themselves permission to fully be authentic. And we have all these corporate games, political games, power struggles, competition that is created in the corporate world. Leaders competing with other leaders, even competing with their followers, because they have to achieve certain KPIs,
Yeah.
showing up in an unauthentic way. And for me, part of being beautiful leader is it's being able to really be authentic and being in integrity. So my question to you is like, how did you arrive to this point? Was this something innate inside of you that you held yourself, like the core of your being? Did you practice that skill? And what do you think leaders who are listening to this and they say, I really would love to be more authentic, but I'm afraid, I don't know how. I'm going to lose my job if I really speak my mind. You know what I mean? If I don't
Yeah.
play the corporate game. So what would you say on that?
So I grew up in a law firm environment,
Mm,
which it has the word partnership, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the partners are entirely collaborative. Doesn't mean that you're not operating with some self-interest, that there's not turf wars or silos. And so that was the world in which I grew up in. There are lots of firms who were far worse than mine. Mine was good on balance, but I learned a lot around why people behave the way they behave. And it's driven by fear and insecurity and power plays.
Yeah.
So, to your question, if a leader says, "Oh, I don't know how to be more authentic. I can't bring my true full self to work." My question was, well, what do you think is stopping you? And when I wrote the book, when I wrote the chapter "B is for Brave," one of the things I read, one of the stories I remember was that I had a particular client who was very disagreeable and was lashing out because of decisions, including the firm, etc., and was a very difficult sort of character. And I was quite fearful of him. And I'd left the firm. Years later, I'd been contacted to help them with a potential sort of seeing off a potential claim. And I was absolutely, completely gripped by fear. And that's where I was introduced to the phrase "false evidence appearing real." I had a fantastic coach at the time called Tina, and she wrote the word fear, false evidence appearing real, on the whiteboard. And it, in that moment, changed my life, because it was basically show up authentic, show up not fearing things that are going to manifest, because they most likely don't. And if you are fearful of something, have a scientific moment and calibrate. Check the evidence to make sure the evidence is absolutely pointing in that direction. Because 9 times out of 10, the thing that we worried about, how we showed up, if we show up this way, X will happen, doesn't happen. And even if it did, then it opens another door for something else, because you need to find your tribe. You need to be able to operate in a business who get you, that enables you to be authentic, because life is just too short and we spend too many hours in the business to not be anything other than who we are, with all of our flaws and imperfections and challenges. And if you do that, then you are sending a very strong message to your team to do the same.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if you do all of that as a leader, what you are doing is actually delving into your capacity in the organization and the resources. Because if everybody is playing and positioning and posturing and not being true, then you as a leader haven't got the full picture. But it sort of needs to start with you. And one of the things that has frustrated me over the years working with leaders is when you get to know them, and you get to know them outside of probably the environments that many of their colleagues would see them, 2 a.m. in the boardroom on a deal, you get to know people in a very meaningful way. So when you get to know people on that level, and you see that they turn on a different psyche, different persona when they're in the business, out speaking to their board, dealing with their non-execs, it makes me sad, because that can't be fulfilling. It's not even about compartmentalizing it. There must be a level of anxiety and strain that creates. So the question is, what can the stakeholders, the top stakeholders, the shareholders and their representatives, whether that's the non-execs, chair, board, what can they also be doing to enable somebody to be able to be authentic? And I think that's the question.
That's a very, very good question. Exactly. So you're visioning in the future the tribe of beautiful leaders. Are we creating the movement? What are we going to do to support that?
Well, the podcast is part of that. So I absolutely hate self-promotion, which is a bit bizarre having written the book. So I hate self-promotion. So I decided that the best way for me to promote the book and the vision for it, and this need for an army of beautiful leaders, was to start speaking about it on podcasts and do it in a way where hopefully the 30 or 40 minutes I have with you, if something lands and is helpful to your listeners and to your viewers, then I'll feel like I've served them. So in other words, I'm just doing the same thing that I do every day with the clients who I meet in person. So that's the current means by which I'm sort of getting myself out there. I'm speaking with various universities and various other sort of professional organizations, because I think, it only takes one person to start a movement.
Yeah.
but it's actually the people who follow afterwards that are more important. So,
Exactly.
the foundational work is done. The follower movement, the followership that comes is actually where people become brave.
Yeah.
And so I'm praying about it as you would if you're in my sort of situation. And I'm just being very discerning around who I'm having conversations with. And I'm letting it sort of percolate and take its time. And I'm paying particular attention to the conversations that I'm having. And every conversation's a joy because it makes me see what I've written and what I've sort of created in a different lens, and because you gift that to me. So who knows? But I think we need a lot of beautiful leaders right now, and
Absolutely.
we need to insist on it. And in an AI age, if you want to make yourself valuable and not potentially redundant, human-centered skill sets in any kind of leading, and we're all leaders. You don't have to have a title to lead. Every one of us has responsibility to lead ourselves and to lead others in what we do. We need to show up with our human competencies really honed, and that requires our focus and our attention.
Yeah, I love that you dropped that in, and because that was something that I also wanted to address, but you already addressed it when it comes to the AI. So thank you so much, Dawn, for being with us today. Anything that you feel like a spontaneous call for action, in addition to what you shared, anything that you would really, really love people to bring home, take with them, besides of reading the book, of course. I mean, we want everybody to read the book.
I think just to have a really human moment in the sense of leadership is hard. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. There's a CMI report, so Chartered Management Institute report, that came out a few years ago about why UK PLC needs better managers. Talks about the plight of accidental leaders, people being not feeling equipped. And then there's a Danish report where people are moving away from the notion of management and leadership because of the sacrifice or perceived sacrifice. So there's a risk of a leadership vacuum. So what do? Well, we have to reframe leadership. And the way that we reframe leadership is I would suggest this, to look at the beautiful leadership framework, because that kind of leader, I'd be quite happy to be. Because it wouldn't be a sacrifice in the sense of I wouldn't be at massive personal expense of my well-being to be a leader if I showed up as a beautiful leader. So that's the key for me, is just, we all lead. Decide how you're going to show up as a leader. Decide what you're going to model for future leaders to ensure you don't have the vacuum, and to realize that, through things like this podcast, the work that you do, and myself and lots of others, you're not alone. There's a lot of people rooting for you to be the best possible version of leader you can be. In the British Army Doctrine, I'll leave you with this. The British Army Doctrine has sort of various pillars for what makes a successful army leader. And it's by no accident that two of the four doctrines are servant leadership and followership. So if the British Army focuses on 50% of the whole doctrine that underpins army leadership and strategy, followership and servant leadership, then I think it's a pretty good steer for us.
Wonderful. Dawn, thank you so much for being my guest.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for coming to TNM Coaching.
Thank you.
And thank you everybody else for listening, tuning in. Beautiful conversation, beautiful leadership. What fantastic book. My invitation to you is to find the time, energy, space to listen to this podcast, but also go to read the book, because there is beautiful frameworks inside that will help you become the best possible leader you can be at this world. Thank you so much for tuning in. And Dawn, once again, thank you for joining.
Thank you, Zoran. My absolute pleasure.